The girl-born Norma Jean Mortensen wanted nothing more than to be loved. She found fame instead. And on an August night in 1962, at just 36 years old, America's most celebrated blonde was discovered dead in her Brentwood home. The world mourned a movie star. But the real tragedy was the woman behind the platinum hair and red lips, a woman who trusted the wrong people, chased the wrong dreams, and found that beauty and fame couldn't fill the emptiness inside. This is the story of beauty, fame, and betrayal, the fall of Marilyn Monroe. She was born on June 1st, 1926 in Los Angeles. To a mother who couldn't care for her, Gladys Pearl Baker was a film cutter at Consolidated Film Industries, but her grip on reality was fragile. Mental illness ran in the family, and Gladys would spend most of her life in and out of institutions. The identity of Norma Jean's father remained a mystery her entire life. For the first 7 years, Norma Jean lived with foster parents Ida and Wayne Bolander in Hawthorne, California. These were her most stable years. The deeply religious household gave her structure, routine, something resembling safety. Gladys would visit when she could, taking her daughter for occasional sleepovers. But the little girl sensed something broken in her mother, something that made even those precious visits feel uncertain. When Norma Jean was 7, Gladys tried to create a home for them. She bought a house near the Hollywood Bowl and took in boarders to help with expenses. For a brief moment, it seemed possible, but mental illness doesn't follow schedules or respect good intentions. In 1933, Gladys had a complete breakdown. She was committed to Metropolitan State Hospital, and Norma Jean watched her mother disappear into a system that would keep her for most of the rest of her life. What followed were the years that would haunt Marilyn Monroe forever. Foster homes, an orphanage, more foster homes, a bewildering rotation of adults who were there one day and gone the next. In some of these homes, she found kindness. In others, she encountered something far darker. Years later, she would speak carefully about sexual abuse, about being touched by men who should have protected her instead. The girl learned early that beauty could be dangerous. She also learned it could be power. She noticed how men looked at her, even when she was young. She understood in that terrible way that traumatized children understand things, that her appearance was currency in a world where she had nothing else to offer. At 16, still in foster care, Norma Jean married James Dougherty, a 20-year-old factory worker. It wasn't romance, it was escape. The marriage gave her a home, a name, a place to belong. When Dougherty joined the Merchant Marines during World War II, his young bride went to work in a defense plant. It was there, in 1944, that a photographer from the 1st Motion Picture Unit spotted her. He suggested she try modeling. The camera loved her. More accurately, she understood instinctively what the camera wanted. She could transform herself, could become whoever the lens demanded. The modeling led to a screen test at 20th Century Fox in 1946. And just like that, Norma Jean Mortensen Dougherty became Marilyn Monroe, the girl who married to escape foster care, now divorced to pursue stardom. The marriage to Dougherty had served its purpose. She had new dreams now, and they didn't include a merchant seaman husband. The early years in Hollywood were brutal. Small roles, bit parts, the kind of work that required sitting in casting offices, being looked over, being told yes or no, based entirely on your measurements and your willingness to smile when powerful men made suggestions. Monroe understood the game. She played it. She played it better than almost anyone. She cultivated relationships with men who could help her studio executive Joseph Schenck. Agent Johnny Hyde, who believed in her so completely that he left his wife and begged Monroe to marry him. She refused, but when Hyde died suddenly in 1950, she was genuinely devastated. He'd been one of the few who saw something in her beyond the obvious. Throughout these years, Monroe was studying, learning, transforming. She took acting classes with Michael Chekhov, nephew of the great Russian playwright she read voraciously, filling her apartment with books. Dostoevsky, Hemingway, poetry, philosophy. She wanted to be more than what Hollywood saw when they looked at her. The breakthrough came in 1950 with The Asphalt Jungle and All About Eve. Small roles, but she made them count. By 1953, she was a genuine star. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire made her one of the biggest box office draws in America. The platinum blonde with the breathy voice and the wiggle when she walked became an icon, a symbol of American sexuality in the conservative 1950s. But something interesting happened behind all that manufactured glamour. Monroe became friends with people Hollywood didn't expect. She befriended Ella Fitzgerald when the legendary jazz singer was still being relegated to small clubs because of her race. Monroe personally called the Mocambo nightclub and promised to sit front row every night if they booked Fitzgerald, they did. And the engagement changed Fitzgerald's career. She later said she never had to play a small club again. Monroe also developed a genuine friendship with Dorothy Dandridge, another barrier-breaking black actress in segregated 1950s. Hollywood, these friendships weren't just unusual, they were quietly radical. Monroe never hid these relationships, even though white media outlets refused to report on them. She also found friendship with co-star Jane Russell on the set of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. The press expected rivalry between the two bombshells. Instead, Russell took the anxious younger actress under her wing like a big sister. When Monroe was nervous about going on set, Russell would go to her dressing room and coax her out. In 1954, Monroe married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio. On paper, it was a fairy tale. America's most famous actress and America's most celebrated athlete. The wedding drew huge crowds and massive media attention. The reality was darker. DiMaggio wanted a wife, not a star. He wanted her home, cooking dinner, being a traditional Italian wife. When she filmed the famous scene in The 7-Year Itch where her white dress blows up over a subway grate with a crowd of gawking men watching, DiMaggio stood in the shadows, furious. The marriage lasted 9 months. Years later, DiMaggio would become protective of Monroe, especially after her death. But during their brief marriage, the relationship was troubled, even abusive. She needed someone who understood the pull of fame, who respected her work. DiMaggio saw it all as competition for her attention. After the divorce, Monroe did something unexpected. In 1955, she moved to New York and essentially went on strike against 20th Century Fox. She was tired of playing dumb blondes. She wanted better roles, more money, more control. She formed Marilyn Monroe Productions with photographer Milton Green and enrolled at the Actors Studio. It was there that she met Lee Strasberg, the guru of method acting, and it was there that things started to get complicated. Strasberg saw Monroe as special, perhaps the most talented student he'd ever taught his wife. Paula quickly became Monroe's constant companion, her on-set acting coach, her confidant. The Strasbergs essentially adopted her as a daughter. Monroe called Lee's elderly parents Mom and Dad. She trusted them completely. What she didn't see or couldn't admit was how dependent she was becoming. Paula Strasberg began traveling with Monroe to every film set, standing behind the director, silently judging each take. Monroe would finish a scene and look past the director to Paula for approval. Directors hated it. They felt undermined, blocked from doing their jobs. But Monroe couldn't work without Paula there. Financially, the relationship was significant too. The Strasbergs depended on Monroe. The fees for Paula's constant presence, the private lessons with Lee, the connection to the famous movie star, it all became entangled in ways that were hard to separate. In 1956, Monroe met Arthur Miller again. They'd first encountered each other in 1951, but both had been married then. Miller was one of America's most celebrated playwrights, winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Death of a Salesman. Where DiMaggio had been threatened by her intellect, Miller seemed to appreciate it. He was sophisticated, literary, serious. She idealized him completely. They married in June 1956. Lee Strasberg gave the bride away. The wedding rings were inscribed with the words, "Now is forever." The media had a field day with the unlikely pairing. Variety's headline read, "Egghead weds hourglass." For a brief time, Monroe was happy. She converted to Judaism for Miller. She grew close to his parents. She told friends this was the first time she'd really been in love, but the happiness wouldn't last. Shortly after the wedding, Monroe and Miller went to England for the filming of The Prince and the Showgirl with Laurence Olivier. The production was difficult. Monroe clashed with Olivier. She was constantly late, anxious, dependent on pills to sleep and pills to wake up. Paula Strasberg was there, as always, which irritated everyone. And then Monroe found Miller's notebook lying open on a table. She couldn't look away. In the pages, Miller had written that he was disappointed in her, that he feared she was a pitiable, dependent waif who would threaten his creativity, that she embarrassed him in front of his intellectual friends, that he regretted marrying her. Monroe was devastated. She told the Strasbergs what she'd read. Her voice breaking Miller had been her dream of what love could be, what being valued for her mind could mean. And his private thoughts revealed that he saw her the way everyone else did, as a beautiful disaster, a burden, something to regret. The marriage limped on for several more years, but the trust was broken. Monroe suffered multiple miscarriages, which deepened her depression. Her dependence on pills grew worse. She'd take sedatives to sleep, then amphetamines to wake up, then more sedatives when the anxiety became unbearable. The cycle was destroying her. Miller tried to help by writing film roles for her. Let's Make Love in 1960, The Misfits in 1961. But The Misfits, which Miller wrote specifically for his wife, became another source of pain. Monroe struggled with the last-minute rewrites, had trouble remembering lines through the fog of pills and alcohol. On set, she reportedly had an affair with co-star Eve Montan Miller. Meanwhile, had grown close to photographer Inga Morath, who would become his third wife. They announced their divorce in November 1960. Monroe traveled to Mexico in January 1961 to finalize it, timing the trip to coincide with John F. Kennedy's inauguration in hopes the media would be distracted. By 1961, Monroe was America's biggest star and utterly lost. She spent much of the year dealing with health problems, surgery for endometriosis and gallbladder issues, weeks in the hospital for depression. In February, her psychiatrist admitted her to Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic in New York. Through a terrible mistake, Monroe was placed in a ward for severely mentally ill patients and locked in a padded cell. She panicked, terrified that she was ending up like her mother, trapped in an institution forever. After 3 days, she managed to call Joe DiMaggio, who immediately came to New York and got her transferred to a better facility. Despite their failed marriage, DiMaggio still cared for her in his way. They'd rekindled a friendship, and some say they'd discussed remarrying. Monroe bought a small house in Brentwood, Los Angeles, her first real home. She filled it with books and Mexican furniture and tried to create something stable. But the demons followed her there. In early 1962, she began filming Something's Got to Give for 20th Century Fox. It should have been a comeback instead. It became a disaster. Monroe was frequently absent, claiming illness. Doctors confirmed she was sick, but the studio publicly accused her of faking it. In May, she took time off to sing Happy Birthday, Mr. President at Madison Square Garden for John F. Kennedy's 45th birthday. Her breathless, sultry performance in a skin-tight rhinestone dress became legendary. It also fueled rumors of an affair with the president, rumors that have never been definitively proven but have persisted for decades. Fox fired Monroe from the film in June and sued her for $500,000. The press blamed her for the production's collapse. Her reputation as difficult and unreliable was now public knowledge. The studio that had made her a star was done with her. In those final months, Monroe was increasingly isolated. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, was there, but the relationship was odd. Murray later gave inconsistent accounts of what happened. Monroe's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, was deeply involved in her life, perhaps too involved. The Strasbergs were still around, still financially dependent on her. She made phone calls to friends, talked about future projects, made appointments for meetings that would never happen. Some who knew her said she seemed to be trying to pull herself together. Others saw a woman spiraling, unable to break free from the pills, the depression, The Weight of Being Marilyn Monroe. On Saturday, August 4th, 1962, Monroe spent the day at her Brentwood home. She met with photographer Lawrence Schiller to discuss a Playboy photo spread. She talked on the phone with friends. Her publicist Patricia Newcomb stayed overnight, and according to Newcomb, they argued because Monroe hadn't slept well in the afternoon. Dr. Greenson came for a therapy session and asked Newcomb to leave. He stayed until around 7 in the evening, then asked Murray to stay overnight to keep Monroe company. Monroe received a phone call from Joe DiMaggio Jr., her ex-stepson, with whom she'd remained close. They had a good conversation about his broken engagement. And then, sometime in the night, Marilyn Monroe died. The official story is that Eunice Murray noticed Monroe's bedroom light on after midnight and found the door locked. Unable to get a response, she called Dr. Greenson, who broke a window to get inside. He found Monroe dead, naked on her bed, with a telephone in her hand and empty pill bottles nearby. The coroner ruled it a probable suicide by barbiturate overdose. But immediately, the questions began. Why was there a delay in calling the police? Why were Murray's stories about that night inconsistent? Where were Monroe's organs after the autopsy? Why did some details not add up? In the decades since, conspiracy theories have multiplied. Some claim Robert F. Kennedy, with whom Monroe allegedly had an affair, was involved in her death. Others point to the mafia, the FBI, the CIA. Books have been written, documentaries produced, investigations launched. In 1982, the Los Angeles District Attorney looked into whether there was evidence of murder. They found none. The truth is probably simpler and sadder. A woman who'd been taking pills for years, who'd survived multiple overdoses before, who was depressed and isolated and frightened about her future, took too many sleeping pills. Whether it was intentional or accidental, we'll never know. Marilyn Monroe wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she looked like. She wanted a family, children, stability, respect. She got fame instead, and fame ate her alive. The tragedy wasn't just her death. It was the life that led to it. A childhood of abandonment and abuse. A career spent playing dumb blondes when she was actually well-read and thoughtful. Marriages to men who wanted different versions of her than who she actually was. Mentors who claimed to love her but depended on her financially and emotionally. An industry that valued her body but dismissed her mind. She was kind to people Hollywood overlooked. She used her star power to help Ella Fitzgerald's career. She was friends with Dorothy Dandridge when it was unpopular. She stood up to studio executives and demanded better treatment. She read Dostoevsky and studied method acting and tried to be more than what they wanted her to be, but she also struggled with demons she couldn't name or escape. The pills that helped her sleep and wake and function became the things that trapped her. The beauty that had been her currency became her cage. The fame she'd worked so hard to achieve left her more alone than she'd been in those childhood foster homes. Ella Fitzgerald wasn't allowed to attend Monroe's funeral. Joe DiMaggio arranged a small service and excluded most of Monroe's celebrity friends. But Fitzgerald never forgot what Monroe had done for her. Years later, she would tell the story of the woman who sat front row every night at the Macambo, the movie star who'd helped change her career. Jane Russell remembered her co-star's insecurity and anxiety rooted in that unstable childhood. In her autobiography, Russell wrote about a beach day in 1962 with close friends, all of them laughing about their problems. She thought of Monroe and wished she'd had her phone number because Monroe belonged there, with people who understood. On August 5th, 1962, the world woke up to headlines about Marilyn Monroe's death. Newspapers ran photos of her platinum blonde hair, her famous smile, her glamorous gowns. They called her a sex symbol, an icon, a tragic star. What they rarely mentioned was the girl named Norma Jean who just wanted someone to stay, who trusted people who let her down, who tried so hard to be loved that she became the most famous woman in the world and still felt invisible. Marilyn Monroe remains a cultural icon more than 60 years after her death. Her image sells everything from perfume to posters. People still debate whether she was murdered or took her own life. Books and movies and documentaries continue to dissect every aspect of her existence. But maybe what matters most is remembering that behind all the platinum hair and red lipstick was a person, a complicated, damaged, intelligent, kind person who made herself into someone the world would look at and who spent her whole life wishing they would actually see her. She deserved better than she got. From her mother, from Hollywood, from the men who claimed to love her, from the people she trusted. The girl who became Marilyn Monroe deserved to be more than a tragedy, more than a conspiracy theory, more than an image on a poster. She deserved to be happy. And that might be the real betrayal in this story. That happiness, the one thing she wanted most, was the one thing fame could never give her. If you enjoyed this look at Marilyn Monroe's life, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories from Hollywood's golden age. Leave a comment below about what struck you most about Marilyn's story. And remember, behind every icon is a human being, and every human being deserves compassion.